There's a comment here from Kind Humanity that says, really thorough look at the colours, the metallics are interesting. Appears they have crazy coverage compared to traditional metal paints. Regarding reactivation, rubbing medium on a painted surface hardly seems a realistic way to test paints. I could take the paint of a mini I painted 10 years ago by rubbing a coarse brush on it. Well, let's do a proper test, shall we? Oh, I just got an email. Wonder who that's from. Hello everybody, it's the Warhipster here, coming at you with a review video of epic proportions. Today we are comparing Speedpaint from the Army Painter, Contrast Paint from Citadel, and Vallejo Xpress Colour from Vallejo. So we need to set some ground rules before we jump in so that everybody has a fair shake and everybody has a chance at the title. We need to set an objective for the video. So, the objective of this video is going to answer this question. If I had to pick one range of paints, which one suits my style of painting miniatures? Now the reason for this is that we need to set clear parameters for a successful outcome. Because I've said this loads of times now, but you can prove anything in a vacuum if you are in charge of the laws of physics. I mean, stop me if you've heard this one before. You can find cheaper and better insert product here if you just. If you just. Those three words do so much heavy lifting because what you're doing there is you're moving the goalposts. Models are cheaper if you just 3D print them. But what about the 3D printer? Priming is cheaper if you just use an airbrush. But what about the airbrush? Gaming is cheaper if you just use Game Pass. But what about the device? You see, you can prove anything if you want to. All you have to do is just move the goalposts. If you just move the goalposts, you'll win. You see, you can prove anything if you want to. And I don't want to do that. What I mean by this is that I can set up this video to prove my biases in any way that I see fit. And there's a lot of folks out there who do that. But I don't want to do that. I want to do the most appropriate thing for all of you at home. So by answering this question about which one suits me, you then in turn learn about me and what Warhipster is as a channel. We set up those ground rules, identify who I am as a painter and how I like to paint, and hopefully it sounds like we're similar. And if we are similar, great. And if we're not, that's also great. You can draw your own conclusions, and then we can join hands and we can skip on down the road together. So with our objective in mind, our three ranges of paints on the table, all that's left to do is to paint some models. And of course, for me to ask you to subscribe to the channel, if you like the video. And if you really like the video and you've already hit that subscribe button, then you can also hit the like button. It's a great way to support me for free and it really helps me out. So thank you very much in advance to all those lovely people out there who hit that subscribe button. Hit it now. And finally, of course, here is a word from our sponsor. Yes, this video is sponsored by Serious Readers, so make sure you watch carefully. As you may or may not know, I do a lot of fine detail work with my tiny paintbrushes, a lot of staring at computer screens, reading emails and rules and Warhammer narrative bits that honestly it's a miracle my eyesight is as good as it is. Well, in the past few months I've noticed a considerable difference in my levels of eye strain, and that's because of the high definition light from Serious Readers that they very kindly sent me to try out. It uses proprietary daylight wavelength technology to replicate the daylight spectrum as closely as possible, which makes a huge difference on the peepers at 4 AM after a 16-hour painting session. Built right here in the UK, Serious Readers is a British company pioneering research into improving sight through shedding better light, relying on replicating the natural daylight spectrum that our eyes have evolved to use. They offer a 5-year warranty and are recommended by over 500 independent opticians. They're also super cool folks with excellent customer service, so much so that when I asked for a colder bulb, they sent me one along with a diffuser to make my life even better. Check out Serious Readers today, and if you pick one up and use offer code SR209 at checkout, they'll throw in a free compact light with any purchase in the Serious Lights range and free international shipping with the offer code. Find out more in the links below. For those of you who don't know me by now, I paint in the style that I call Contrast Plus. And what this boils down to is I get my contrast paint on my model for almost everything that isn't a metallic colour. I then shade things that need shading with the new contrast-esque shades or indeed other contrast paints, and then I apply a series of layers and highlights to bring them right up to a Warhipster parade ready standard. Effectively, I eliminate the idea of doing 2 coats of base or layer paints as my starting point and then shading them to get them to a battle ready standard. A lot of the time it's just contrast, metallics, highlights, done. Using this style, I've painted everything from gods and supreme commanders down to the lowliest of infantry. Additionally, I do this for the added benefits of everything moving that bit faster and a lot more vibrant than your basic flat layers of base paint. It's basically the idea of you start bright and go darker before bringing it up again, rather than starting darker and bringing it all the way up to bright. It's important to me to get as close to a box art finish as I can, but to do it in a quarter of the time. It may take a more classic painting artist. Then again, I do move lightning fast. So with all that established, what we're going to do is apply this methodology to some Space Marines in the colours of the Dark Krakens, because I also owe Jake a Dark Krakens video and some painted Space Marines. So let's get into it. One of the main reasons for picking the Dark Krakens for this video is that black and purple are 2 colours that are hard to get right, even at the best of times. The Dark Krakens have this rich purple and black scheme with some silver accents that make for a really cool and striking colour scheme. So the first thing to focus on here is the black. Now, black armoured miniatures look like this. Black Templar, Grim Black, and Black Lotus look like this. It ain't black, it's grey. Where contrast paints take the easy win here is with Black Legion, which is a much, much blacker paint. It's less contrasty, but it is black, and that's what I want. To fix the question of Black Templar before we had Black Legion though, we used to layer down a pre-shade that matches the tone of what our highlights will eventually be. Blue, purple, grey, they all work, and if you want to see more on that, check out my Ultimate Black Armour video. It's a really useful video for, well, black armour. So to keep this fair, we're going to do Black Templar over a pre-shade so that Grim Black and Black Lotus have a chance. We're going to use Speedpaint Beowulf Blue, Citadel Ultramarines Blue, and Vallejo Storm Blue. Applying the Ultramarines Blue first, this is a classic for me, I do know how this paint works, but I was a little bit heavy-handed because, well, I'm familiar with how it works, so adding the black over the top, it doesn't matter. Next, we did the Xpress Colour, and this was interesting because I really learnt how this has a much longer drying time. The colour isn't quite as impactful as Ultramarines Blue, but it does go on a lot easier and nicer. The Beowulf Blue is similar to the Xpress Colour in that it kind of goes on a little bit smoother, it's got a longer drying time so you can mop it up a bit quicker, and it has quite a vibrant colour, which is really, really nice. With that Beowulf Blue fully applied, it took roughly 10 minutes to apply and about 7.5 minutes to be visually dry. It was nice and smooth to apply. That longer drying time means you can edit it a little bit more, so there's not too many scuffs and dark spots. The Vallejo Xpress Colour Storm Blue took roughly 10 minutes to apply as well, and it took roughly 13 minutes to be visually dry. Again, nice long drying time, so it can be edited as you go along. You can mop up that excess and avoid dark spots. The Ultramarines Blue, again, took roughly 10 minutes to apply, and it took about 5 minutes to be visually dry. Now, this is the roughest of the coats because, like I said, I just went slapdash on it, and, you know, there's lots of dark spots, and that drying time is the shortest, so it's harder to edit those out when you're absorbing the paint, as it were. And here we have all three next to each other. Ultramarines Blue on the left, Xpress in the middle, and the Speedpaint on the far right. Now, I think they all look similar in tone, and they look pretty cool. Beowulf Blue being up first, this one here. It's kind of the warmest and sits between Ultramarines Blue and Xpress Colour. We got a couple of little mistakes in here on the purple, but that's going to be important for later because we need to see if these paints cover over well with grey cere, which is what we originally primed the miniatures with. Next up, we're going to look at the Xpress Colour, and as you can see, it's kind of the weakest of the three. We've got a little mistake there on the shoulder. It's not the strongest colour. It's a nice colour, but it's not like the most vibrant of the three. I really like it though. Very nice smooth application all over. And we've got another little blob there on the arm. But otherwise, really nice colour. Lastly, we have the Ultramarines Blue here one, and you know, I've already mentioned it, I went a little bit ham with the application. We've got some mistakes here on the elbows. It just happens when you're trying to apply this kind of paint. You just, you know, you can't really avoid it. But it's a really nice vibrant colour, except it does have those dark spots, so it's harder to apply than the other two because of that longer, or rather in this case shorter, drying time. Otherwise, we've got some nice looking Marines already. Moving on now to the black, we apply Grim Black all over our Speedpaint Marine, and it's much like the original blue that we put down, nice and simple to apply, and it's got that longer drying time. Then we applied Black Lotus over the top of the Vallejo Xpress Colour Marine, and the longer drying time here was a little bit tougher because it just kind of took a while to really merge with that blue. And finally, the Black Templar absolutely just smashed it all over the Ultramarines Blue. Done this so many times before that I knew exactly how it was going to perform. Encouragingly enough, applying Grim Black over the top of the Beowulf Blue has produced a much blacker armour, which is great. However, there was one issue here, as you can see here on the backpack. The black has mixed with the blue underneath on the back, and this is because the blue wasn't fully dry. What I mean by this, it was visually dry, but Army Painter recommends that you spend 2 hours between each layer in order for the paint to fully cure. So what's happened there on that bit there on the back, that specific little brush stroke just there wasn't fully dry, so it has reactivated a bit and mixed on the model. So this is just user error, but also I didn't wait for 2 hours. Maybe I should have done. Who knows? Next up, we have Black Lotus that went over the top of that Storm Blue, and this has come out really nicely. It did take a long time to dry, and even then I had to, in some spots, go and do a couple of little extra layers, and this is just because of the, well, sort of slightly weaker colours, and because when I was applying it, I was doing a little bit too much kind of mopping about to try and make it nice and smooth. It's just, from my perspective, not really fully understanding how the paint worked just yet, but this is ultimately the final result once you get a really, really good coat of that Black Lotus over the top of the blue. And it looks very matte and very, very nice. Finally, we have Black Templar, and well, you've seen me do this a ton of times before. I think it looks absolutely fantastic. It applies really, really easily, but this is just my experience with the paint. I know how it works, so I just went all over, really nice and heavy, and we got a really, really cool looking black miniature at this point. So yeah, Black Templar does the job. Finally, if we compare all three together, you can see that they are much of a muchness, and that was exactly what I wanted to happen for us to get that really nice dark black for our armor. And I'm very pleased that all three managed to do exactly what I wanted them to do. That slight reactivation, even if it is reactivation, I'm sure somebody will say that it wasn't, but that slight problem there on the backpack, I'm just going to wear it because, you know, this is just a test, and I think it's fair to just leave it for now, but I think 95% of it looks pretty good. So pretty happy with how we've managed to get a black armor out of these 3 ranges. So it's time to move on to the next color, which is purple. Except before we do the purple, we do need to clear up our mistakes on the grey seary bits that we don't want to be black. So we took grey sear and we have applied it across all 3 of our Marines. And, well, in this case, to be fair to the speed paint, I left it for 2 hours, waited and covered it over, and, well, it didn't reactivate when I did this. So that is a big win from the army painter's perspective, that these paints in particular didn't reactivate when applying acrylics over the top. As you can see here, after one single coat, this is our Xpress and our Speedpaint Marine, left and right. It's covered over and there is no kind of reactivation on either of them. It's not fully covered, but I would expect that painting a bright color over the top of a dark for a kind of correction like this, you would expect then that to do a second coat over the top would be the one that would cover it, and that is exactly what I found would happen. As you can see here, after having done 2 coats of grey sear, those mistakes are gone. So I did wait for 2 hours for all 3 of them, and, you know, I didn't want to kind of take my time too much, but I gave the speed paint its fairest dues, and it has been covered over. So no reactivation after 2 hours on the blue or the black, which is really encouraging. The Xpress Colour, again, they've covered over perfectly fine after 2 coats, which is really good. And, well, you're about to see it, of course, and you know this already, but from a contrast perspective, it was covered over absolutely fine after 2 coats, because, well, as I've said so many times, this is the paint I'm most experienced with, and that is what I would expect to see. So, yeah, good for everyone. Moving on then, it's time to get on with the colours. We use Purple Swarm for the speed paint. For all the purple details, this is the bolt casing, the arms and the shoulders. And, well, much like with the previous 2, it goes on quite nicely and it has that longer drying time. Next up, we have Gloomy Violet for the Xpress Colour. And, well, this, like with Storm Blue, is the slightly more weaker colour. It's kind of almost pastel-y in a way. It's still nice, but it goes on nice and smooth, and it can be edited a little bit quicker because of the longer drying time. There's a theme. Then we used Leviathan Purple, and this is the darkest and most vibrant of the 3, and it goes on beautifully. This is part of the kind of second range of contrast paints that they released, so it's just a really nice colour to work with. And here we are then. So Purple Swarm, as you can see, it's really nice colour. It's flat, so because we've got that longer drying time with that nice kind of shading, although there's not much shading to be had here because of these details being quite open and flat. But Purple Swarm looks quite nice. I really like that colour. I think it's a really nice kind of mid-purple between the 2, as you'll see coming up next. Here's Gloomy Violet, and, well, it's not that gloomy. It is quite bright. Again, I think we're going to say this a lot for these colours. They're really nice, but they are not quite as dark and as vivid as I perhaps thought they would be. But the application of them was really cool. So that longer drying time means I can edit, and those shoulder pads come out looking nice and smooth. And that is one of the hardest parts to paint on these Space Marines. And when Contrast first released, they had Shyish Purple, but now we have Leviathan Purple, and I think it's an absolutely amazing colour. It applies really nicely, it's dark and vivid, and it goes on very smoothly, unlike Shyish Purple. And, well, I think this one's the one for the Dark Krakens, but you tell me. And finally, once again, we have all 3 next to each other, and as you can see, there is definitely a kind of colour gradient going on here. Leviathan Purple on the left, Gloomy Violet in the middle, and Purple Swarm on the right. And, well, with Gloomy Violet being the brightest of the 3, perhaps if we did a second layer it would become even darker. Well, we know it would, but would it be the right tone? I'm not entirely sure. The other 2, though, apply quite nicely, and they're pretty good colours, but I think that Leviathan Purple is probably the most appropriate here, just because of the scheme that we're working with. Purple is a difficult colour, and it never seems to be exactly what anybody wants. And, well, you know, you might have a completely different opinion to me looking at these, and that's just the nature of purple. But otherwise, I'd say all three just about passed this test. They look pretty good. Moving on now then. We're going to be doing the metallics. Now, one of the things I really like to do with metallics is just cover them over the top of all of the metallic details that I have, and I don't have to worry about relayering them with grey sear to ensure that we've got no colour shining through underneath, because I use base and layers in acrylic format. So one of the things I wanted to test here with these metallic paints is whether or not they could do that. And it's not a fair test, as it were. It's not kind of a point of criticism, but you'll soon see what actually happens when you use these. It goes on absolutely fine. I felt like it was a bit weak applying it, and that the shade wasn't settling where I would expect it to, and well, I didn't really like the highlight that was happening with Broadsword Silver in the speed paint, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Because I don't own any Vallejo metallics, I just use Iron Warriors over the top of both of our other two Marines, and well, I just applied a base paint. You guys know how this works. So, let's look at it then. Broadsword Silver over the top of our Speedpaint Marines metallic details. Things that I thought were interesting here was that if you use Broadsword Silver over a darker colour, you can actually get a really decent looking metallic. But over the top of the base colour, there are some problems. For the way that I like to paint, if we go to the super zoom here, you can see that the silver over the top of the purple is there clear as day, and if you look at this edge highlighting thing that's going on here, it's a white edge highlight. That's not a silvery edge highlight. That's the contrast paint pulling back and leaving us with the base coat underneath. And this is why I mentioned if you do this over a darker color, you might get some really interesting looking areas. But as you can see on that barrel, that purple is still very, very much there. It's just, you know, not covered over at all. Now, this isn't the fault of the paint. That's just kind of what I thought might happen, but I was really hoping that I wouldn't have to grey sear all of my metallic details in order to avoid that happening. I was hoping that it would cover it over a little bit better. On an area that's as recessed as that Aquila, you can see it just looks kind of flat. There's not really any kind of shading going on there. Now, if we look at the back here, and you see on the backpack, you can see on those kind of vents and stuff, over the top of the black, it looks really quite nice. So maybe this is where you can add a little bit of kind of nice metallicness with these paints. I don't know. At the moment, I'm not particularly impressed with it. As for our Iron Warriors, well, that's just gone on absolutely fine. It's a base paint. It does exactly what you would expect. And I think this is an important thing to note, that applying these metallic paints, you often don't want to go into something like a bolt gun and have to neaten it up. You also don't want to have to avoid it in the first application. So when you're painting something as fiddly as this, is there really any place for a metallic speed paint? I don't know. It's your choice after all. So given as I needed to add some shade into these metallics, I decided to get some Nuln Oil, and I was going to use this across all three because, well, I thought that the speed paint one was looking a little bit flat, so I decided to start with that. I applied the Nuln Oil over the top of these metallic details, and, well, we had some reactivation issues. I'd waited the 2 hours, and, well, I don't notice it just yet, but as this kind of goes on, I start to notice there's a little bit of floating pigment, especially when it came to doing the Aquila on the chest, which is where you would expect there to be a fair bit of pigment going on in the recesses. And, well, you're going to see it in just a second when I wipe this on my thumb. There's a little bit of a glittery shine, a little bit of grey in there. I then did test this on the base as well. You see how it comes out a bit metallic. That's the paint reactivating, even after waiting for 2 hours. And, well, that was disappointing. I moved on and started shading our other two guys, because it does exactly as I expected, and just applied the Nuln Oil over the top of the Iron Warriors. Absolutely no problems here, and, well, you'll see what it looks like. Here we have all three, and you can see that the Nuln Oil has worked really nicely over the Iron Warriors, as you would expect, but on our Broadsword Silver here, it's actually washed out the colour even further, and that's further signs of reactivation. In fact, those purple bits you can see here on the bolt gun barrel, they're even more vivid than before. So the purple hasn't reactivated, but the silver has. And waiting for 2 hours for this was really, really disappointing. And, well, it's not so much of a problem on these kind of darker areas on the back because it's already quite dark. It's already kind of a hint of silver over the top of the black. But here on the barrel and on that kind of magazine down there, it's just incredibly frustrating to see. And especially after I'd waited for 2 hours and I didn't want to have to kind of go in and redo it with Grey Seer. And at this point, that is now not an option if it's going to reactivate again. It was at this point that I got frustrated and I needed to stop. I'd been waiting for hours for things to dry, just to give everyone the fair shake, so I decided I was just going to do Retributor armor so that we could get to the end. I used Retributor armor to paint in the Aquillas on the bolt gun casings on all 3 of our guys rather than use greedy gold, and then I shaded them all with Reichland Flesh Shade as well, just to get things moving and to get to the end. And this entire job took me about 10 minutes. Then to finish things off, I took a tiny bit of Grey Seer and I applied this as a little line across their eye lenses, as they have those nice white glowing lenses, as we saw in the picture earlier of the Dark Krakens. So with those eye lenses now done, our models are what I would call Warhipster battle ready, and we could take them to parade ready, but I feel like the best way to do this is to look at them at this point to see what they look like. So I'm not going to do the highlights over all of the armor because, well, we're looking at these paints, not about how good rust grey goes over them, for example. Vallejo Xpress Colour. This range is cracking. The paints have a much longer drying time than contrast paints, improving their workability, and the ability to rescue slightly too heavy coats is really nice. The method of adding a lot of this type of paint to an area and then working the paint around the surface with your brush is perfect for Xpress Colour. I know Juan Hidalgo was involved in the making of these paints, and this is a style he champions when working with one coat paints, and that is on full display here. They have the most matte finish of all 3 ranges when they dry, and this is an extremely desirable trait for some people, and for others it's a bit of a nothing burger. That's not a criticism, but it is worthy of praise here. If you like the dried finish, then you're onto a winner. In many ways, Vallejo Xpress Colour is the supreme of these paints to use, but they aren't without their downsides. The workability is also a curse. You run the risk of actually absorbing a lot of the colour in your attempts to move it around the model, and so you lose some of that rich colour. Not in a big way, but when doing something like a dark, vibrant colour like purple or indeed black, you can end up with a flatter result if you're overzealous with your correcting, and that can leave you feeling a bit like it's a futile exercise in a new paint range, and so you end up picking up your old classic methods. The other issue here is the size of the range. There's 23 paints and a medium. It's not enough to replace your entire back catalogue, even with a medium to thin stuff down and create extra colours. You'll be mixing a lot and relayering a lot to get the tones you want if they aren't represented in this small range. I would like that purple to be a lot darker. It's a pleasing colour right now, but it's just not there. Contrast paints launched with I think 35 colours and a medium. They covered the bases, but were missing a few gaps or bridge colours, like a purple between Shaiish and Magos purple as but one example of many. Ultimately, I think this is a great start from Vallejo. They know how to make paint, and they have taken their time doing it. It's extremely promising and worth picking up at least 1 or 2 for the colours you want to try. You'll get a bunch of use out of it, and you'll be fully trained for the next 2 or 3 releases they do in the coming months and years. But a full transfer over? No, not yet. Speedpaint 2.0. From not enough colours to far too many, we have Speedpaint 2.0, and I have a few things to say about Speedpaint. Firstly, the choice is vast. The Mega Speedpaint set has 46 colours, 3 metallics and a medium, so already that's huge. But the complete set is 79 colours, 10 Speedpaint metallics and a medium. They also make a point that this 2.0 version was developed with Dana Howell, Watch It, Paint It, and Goobertown Hobbies, and that 12 of these new colours were designed by them, which is a unique idea and is something other paint companies could do with adding to their development cycle. With this vast amount of choice comes a lot of potential and a lot of colours, so much so that you won't be mixing very often, as they've probably got you covered in one form or another. They cover about as well as any paint in this space, and I wouldn't say they're any more difficult to use than the others. The active drying time is fairly long, so they can be moved about the model areas if you've got any particularly heavy coats. So in terms of the application of these paints, they work really well. The part I'm struggling with is this idea of 2 hours of curing time to ensure they don't reactivate when you try to relayer them. I found this to be true, although varying degrees of successful, as you can see in this video, but the metallics just feel like the same old Speedpaint 1.0, and that no matter what you do, they're going to reactivate. This is a problem because the solutions are not speed paint. Because I'm painting one Space Marine here, I should not have to wait 2 hours between paint layers for it to be safe to work on. The other solution is to varnish it, but I shouldn't have to do that between paint layers to use this. All this is adding time to the paint job, not speeding it up. To clarify, I painted these in sections one at a time, all the black, all the purple, all the metallics, and I was sat waiting for sometimes up to 90 minutes before it was safe to go back into the water. The solution is not to paint more minis either. If I have to do one detail like a bolt gun casing, should I have enough minis on the desk that I can spend 2 hours painting bolt gun casings? If I don't have to wait 2 hours for every paint to fully cure, should I test every paint I ever buy for drying time? Is it reasonable to expect me to spend a day watching paint dry? I don't think so. So I'm struggling to see who these are for. The closest I can come to is to people who paint lots of minis at once in 2 or 3 colours and have limited hobby time, maybe say 2 hours of an evening. All that being said, if you really like a colour from this range and you want to use it as like a primary colour for your army, like Power Arm or something, then yes, I would absolutely recommend buying it. There's so many different shades in this range that they cover a lot of the bases that some of the other ranges don't have. And as we've seen, that if you are happy waiting for 2 hours for these things to fully cure, you can correct any mistakes and you can go about your business adding shades and things like that. The paint does work, and the constant reactivation issue of 1.0 is mostly gone, apart from those metallic paints. But would I recommend painting something like Angron in all speed paint? No. If you tell me these style paints aren't meant for models like him, then I would recommend checking out my channel, as there's over 300 videos all about how they absolutely can be used on models like Angron, and I would say to you that if you say that these paints are perfect if you just paint them on infantry, then you're moving the goalposts. I know I have a tendency to use a lot of paints for Contrast Plus, but that's kind of the deal with pushing these minis to this level. The contrast section is usually 10 to 12 paints on a large model like Angron, and I do a lot of layering and blending and things like that with those same core paints. But if you said each one took 20 minutes but had to add an additional 2 hours, you aren't speed painting, you're slow painting surely. Contrast paints. I bet you think I'm going to shill now. Well, no. You see, using Vallejo and speed paint these last couple of weeks has proved some criticisms I've long had of contrast paint. They're effective, and they work, and when you get that technique right for applying them, your minis can look stunning. But the drying time on contrast paints is very short. The margin for error is not particularly wide, so when you're painting flat surfaces like armour, you've got to move quickly and methodically to get it looking as smooth as you dreamed of it being. There's more of a knack to it with contrast paints than there is with the other two, and we've had 4 years to show that this is a turn-off for a lot of folks. They also tend to veer towards a more satin finish as you start to thin them down, and this can create shiny surfaces in places you don't want it to be. You can of course use a varnish or even some medium to take that out, but you shouldn't have to do that because of an unintended consequence of using it. I also think it's time for GW to revisit the older darker colours like Shyish Purple, Ultramarines Blue, Dark Angels Green, Leviathan Blue, Basilicanum Grey, etc., because they are some of the hardest one-coat solutions to get absolutely right when you go in clean with them. They dry super quick, as mentioned, which can result in much, much darker results, and some of these even feel lifeless and flat regardless of primer. A shade brings them to life sometimes, or even using a pre-shade to get the vibrancy you were after, but again, I think this is annoying, and with the new contrast paints, this is so much less of an issue. Maybe I just have old pots, but I think the point stands. Finally, when it comes to all three, we can talk about price. Contrast is the most expensive, Army Painter is second, and Vallejo is the cheapest, at least as far as I can figure out. What you get from all three is varying degrees of accessibility though. I know that I can get contrast paint from any independent gaming store or Warhammer shop on the high street. The Army Painter I can get from most independent gaming stores, and Xpress Colour at the moment is pretty tricky to come by. I don't even have the full set yet, I'm still trying to get my hands on Nuclear Yellow. Point is, contrast is more expensive, but it's guaranteed where I live. The others, I have to wait, and for paints, well, I want to see it in person before I buy it, because shipping paints to myself one by one from the internet isn't a great experience if the shade of colour isn't right in person to what it looks like on my monitor, and the solution here is not to just buy the entire range, because that's way more expensive than just one pot of paint if I'm missing one colour. So which one is right for me? Well, in their own ways, they each are. But with the criticisms I have laid out in this video, contrast from Citadel still wins the day. Shock horror, right? The Contrast Plus guy chooses contrast paints. What a waste of time. Hold that thought, because I think the Army Painter are close, and Xpress Colour is even closer. Cut down that wait time on Speedpaint and expand that range of Xpress Colour, and it's a great time to be alive. The optimal position is for the choice to be about tone and not about brand. Brand shouldn't matter at all, and yet for a lot of folks it really does. Ultimately, you can paint your models with whatever you like, in whatever way you like, and that's really all that matters. I like contrast paints, and nearly 35,000 of you seem to like them too. But I know that lots of you like the speed paint, and I know that a lot of you will really like the Vallejo stuff. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful, and I would love to get your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a great discussion about these one-coat paint solutions because, well, I want it to be a discussion. It's not up to me to tell you what to do, I'm just telling you what I like to do. So, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, you love the channel, and you want to support me further like these legends and bosses on the screen before you, you can do so. Head to patreon.com/warhipster or head to ko-fi.com/warhipster. Alternatively, you could become a YouTube member by heading to the channel page and clicking on the join button just here, just like these amazing, wonderful people have done. And if you really like this video or you just want to shoot me some support, you can click on the thanks button just below this video. Don't forget to share it, like it, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And to make sure you stay up to date, don't forget to click the bell icon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Happy wargaming.